Hi there, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. We're excited to have you for our webinar about self-service business intelligence for everyone. My name is Daniel Mintz. I'm the Chief Data Evangelist here at Looker. I'll be your host and your moderator for today's webinar. And with me today, I have Howard Dresner, who's the Chief Research Officer at Dresner Advisory Services. He's going to talk about, the overarching market trends for self-service business intelligence and share a whole bunch of really interesting research that he's done with us. So we're going to get started in just a second, but before we do, I just wanted to go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. One is that we're going to do Q&A at the end. We'll have 15 minutes for it. So if you have a question while we're going, that's fine. Just enter it in the Q&A box on your screen and hit submit, and then we will do our best to get all of those questions answered at the end of the presentation. And I should say that this presentation is being recorded, and we'll send it over to you just as soon as it's over. So if you miss anything or want to hear it again, you'll have that opportunity. And with that, let's get started. So I'm just going to sort of set things up before we dive into Howard's research. But I think the key frame to keep in mind, the key thing that I don't think any of us would dispute, is that the world of data today is changing. And I see three big trends that are really driving that change. The first is that SaaS applications, really applications of all kinds, are exploding, and all of those applications put off data exhaust. So there's just more data than ever before. The second is that everybody at your enterprise probably wants access to data. It's not just data analysts anymore. It's people across the enterprise who want access. And the third is that the data infrastructure that we have available to us has evolved, and that luckily puts us in a pretty good position for solving the first two problems. So let's dig into each of those quickly. So the first is just, as I said, business applications, primarily SaaS applications, are exploding. And all of these are data applications, whether it's Salesforce. If you're a salesperson, you're just sitting, putting data into Salesforce, updating your forecasts, recording information about leads. If you're a support person, in Zendesk, you're putting data in about those tickets and what people are asking about. If you're a marketer using Google Ads, you're giving Google Ads data about which campaigns are working, and they're giving you information back about how much they cost and which ones to invest deeper in. And so what generally happens is, because there's so much more data than ever before, all of these departments, each of whom have a bunch of data tools, come to you and say, hey, I want access to my data. And so you hook up the tools that they're using that are producing all of this data exhaust to Excel, to a workbook tool like Tableau, so that they can get access. And that seems great, because now they have access to data where they didn't before. The problem is, very quickly, you end up in a world that looks like this, where, because there are so many different departments who want access to data, and each of those have different needs and different tools that they're using, and often those tools overlap, you end up with this mess where everybody's got their own sort of pipeline to the underlying data, but actually getting that data to talk to each other and making sure everybody stays on the same page is really difficult. So if that trend is about supply, the second trend is really about demand, right? Everybody in your organization wants data. And that's not just analysts, as I said, it's people across the organization, because, whether you're a quantitative marketer who's, diving deep into the data to think about optimizations, or if you're a DevOps engineer trying to manage your server spend, or you're a customer success manager trying to focus in on the customers who are having the most trouble with your product, you're looking at data, right? You know that data can help you do your job better. It can answer your questions. And we need to recognize as BI professionals that we won't reach everyone with BI as it is currently constituted. This stat kills me every time I see it, but the majority of companies still use Excel as their primary BI tool, quote unquote BI tool. And I think a big part of the reason for that is that the tools that we're offering them to replace Excel, that we're offering people to replace Excel, are simply too complicated and too hard to use. And so they say, I know I theoretically could get more value from better data, but I'm just going to stick with what I'm familiar with, because I don't have time to learn something new. But what I would say, and we'll see if Howard agrees, is that there is hope. And that hope, I think, in large part is possible because of the third trend, which is that the data infrastructure we have access to has really evolved. And the trends in data engineering forever give us bigger, faster, cheaper databases. Now with the advent of cloud MPP data stores like Snowflake and Google BigQuery and Amazon Redshift and Athena, the quantity of data that can be processed for pennies is just absolutely staggering. The second thing is that, we've moved from a world where transformation had to be this big heavyweight step between extracting the data from its source and loading it into its target, to one where it's much more iterative. So you're extracting the data and you're often loading it pretty raw into these databases because they can handle that data very flexibly. They can handle nested schemas or JSON objects and do that transformation later, which gives you more flexibility. And, I do think that SQL remains the standard. And for those of us who have made a career of being good at SQL, that's good news. And so, looks like we lost a slide there. Hold on, there we go. I think the trend is pretty clear, right? Cloud databases are taking over. They have changed our world, and they will continue to get a bigger and bigger share of people's data usage. And you're seeing even financial companies and healthcare companies move to the cloud. They recognize that security is not an impediment, that they can keep data secure and private in the cloud. And so, it just gives us all of these things in terms of power and performance, in terms of elasticity, so we're only paying for what we use. That saves us money. They're easier to use, certainly, than something like Hadoop. And, as I said, they can, in fact, meet any security needs that you throw at them. And so I think this raises a big question when you look at these trends, right? What is the future of business intelligence? And I think we can glean the guiding principles from those trends, right? So because of the rise of SaaS applications, we're going to have more data than ever before. It's going to be more varied than ever before. It's going to be more shapes and sizes. It's going to move faster than ever before. We need to plan for that. We can't settle on a solution that can't deal with that. The second is that everybody in the organization is going to want access to data, and they don't just want data, they want insight, right? They want information, they want answers to their questions. They want actionable intelligence so that they don't just learn something, but they know what to do based on that. And the third is that we're going to have to take advantage of these modern data warehouses, because if we don't, there's simply no way that we're going to be able to deal with the ever-growing amount of data and the ever-growing demand for data. And so, at Looker, what our solution is a data platform that sits on top of these modern data stores, provides everybody in the business the data that they need, but does so in a way that's governed, that makes sure that, if somebody in sales and somebody in marketing ask the same question, they're going to get the same answer. They're not, each working in their own little silo where they can invent their own data that just happens to tell them the thing that they want. There are industry standard and company standard answers to these key metrics. So they're not making it up as they go along. And, I think what this points to is that the future of BI is not only a BI tool. This isn't to say that BI and dashboards and reports are going away. I do think that continues to be and will continue to be the most common way that people ingest and understand data. But, being able to give people actionable intelligence that's right in their existing workflows provides huge benefits in terms of coercing them, pulling them away from Excel, because it's, if it's in Slack or it's in Microsoft Teams where they already are, meeting them there. And so, we think a data platform that can give everybody that sort of unified, trusted view of their business and the business's data is really critical. We think that an architecture that's built to take full advantage of the modern ecosystem with all of its goodness, that, its speed, its low cost, and its ever growing, improving specs is really important. And we think that, actionable insights that are delivered to the right person in the right place at the right time, that's sort of the magic trio. And if you can get those three things, that's really going to serve the needs of all of the people inside your business, going to give them that full view of how things are going, give them the answers to their questions in places where they can actually do something about it. So that's our view, but I'm really eager, as I'm sure you are, to hear from Howard, who talks to hundreds or thousands of people who are in the field doing this every year, and brings that insight. So with that, I'm excited to hand it over to Howard.
Thanks, Daniel, and thanks everybody for joining today. So just 2 seconds of background around who we are. So Dresner Advisory Services is an independent research organization. We publish tomes and tomes of research on this space focused on analytics, information management, business intelligence, and performance management. And last year we published over 2,000 pages of objective independent research. So I'm going to share some of that with you today. Not all of it, obviously, but some of the high points. And I'm told that our hosts today are actually sharing a link to some of that research that you can actually download. So we do publish many reports. One of them is our flagship Wisdom of Crowds Business Intelligence Market Study. I will be drawing on content from that report as well as from our self-service report, as well as some new data, which I have just recently harvested from our current data collection project. So this will be the first time anyone has actually ever seen it. So here's our agenda, and I actually agree with a lot of what Daniel had to say, and this is a story of hope. There's a lot that's going on that's pretty exciting in the business intelligence and analytics and information management market. So we'll talk about some of those trends. We'll talk about some of the drivers, who's driving it in the industry, who are the targets for business intelligence, what are the objectives, and then finally talk about collaboration and governance, which are sort of the cornerstones of self-service. So let's start off with some of these trends. And this is something that is not available in one of our reports, but we take a look at how organizations are using data in the decision-making process. Now, I've been in this space for over 30 years, and we've seen some great progress, certainly over the course of 30 years. But you can see that a majority of users are relying on data. The majority are using data all of the time, which is great, and then the balance are using it most of the time, and then a minority are using it only some of the time, and almost no one said that they're using it infrequently or never. So that's a really positive sign, and certainly even 10 years ago, that would not have been the case. Then we take a look at budget plans, and this is also very encouraging. Budget plans year after year after year are going up for business intelligence. And I don't have the breakout here, but of course some of that goes towards headcount, some of it goes towards subscription. Some folks are still paying for maintenance on perpetual licenses, some goes towards services, but in general, those budgets are going up across all sizes of organizations for the last 3 years. Here's another chart that is not available anywhere except here today. We ask our survey respondents about the return on investment for business intelligence. And we actually give them some brackets for different ranges of return on investment. And you can see that it's actually, business intelligence is actually a really good investment. It's most are saying that they're getting at least 6% or better return on investment, which is a whole lot better than most investments that you can get out there today. And this is, for the last 2 years, we've started to really try to quantify this return on investment and the value associated with business intelligence. So on balance, it's a really good investment. We also, for a number of years, we've been asking about success and whether or not organizations perceive themselves to be successful with business intelligence. And I can report, and this has been consistent for a number of years, that most organizations view themselves as at least moderately successful with business intelligence, and really only about 15 or 16% are saying or indicating that they have been unsuccessful with business intelligence. Now, there's always room for improvement here, but these are some pretty good numbers. Organizations are certainly getting value, and they do perceive themselves as successful. Now, this year, and this is fresh data that I'm sharing with you right now, so this is 2020 data, we, for years, allowed folks to enter in text comments around what made them successful with business intelligence, if they had been successful. And this year, we actually gave them some choices based on all of that text information that we've collected over a number of years. And it turns out that success with business intelligence is largely dependent upon some of the human factors. It's about senior management support and a culture that's receptive to it. So it's sort of the softer side of things rather than technology. So it's really not the technology as much. And certainly technology helps. Technology is an important enabler. But what you can see here is that it's very much about the organization and the people within that organization and the support for things like business intelligence and fact-based decision-making. And we also ask about, for those successful organizations, how do they measure success within their organization? And you can see that the most successful organizations have a direct line or a connection to the users or the customers of the business intelligence solutions. So those folks that are providing it have a regular engagement and discourse with those folks. And we find that for organizations that have been less than successful, they're more focused on numbers of deployed users or looking at numbers of logons or system or application activity. At the end of the day, if you want to be successful, you have to have a regular dialogue with the folks that are actually using the technology. Okay, so changing gears just a little bit here, let's take a look at the state of data. And this is really important because this really, and it goes to or speaks to what Daniel said a moment ago around trust. How can we as users trust the information? And you can see we've been asking, and this comes from by the way, this model comes from my second book, Profiles in Performance, where we actually went out and did some diagnostics for organizations and asked them about how they felt about their data and whether it's trustworthy. And what you can see is the lightest colored blue bars on the bottom is the best state. That is what we call data as truth. And as you go above there, it becomes somewhat less reliable, less trustworthy, but you can see that going from 2015 to 2019, it's actually been improving. Now, that may seem slight to you, but it is really significant that it's approaching almost a weighted mean of a 3.0, which is good. That means that users in our sample within our research community are saying that they're more comfortable, more confident in the data. If organizations are confident and people are confident in the data and they can trust it, they're much more likely to use it more regularly. And so that's really important. And we take another view of this. If we look at it by industry, what's notable here is some organizations or some industries are more forward-thinking and do a better job of managing that data and trusting that data. Manufacturing on the left, they would say that they have the most trust in their data. High technology, advertising also quite strong. And some on the far right, the one that surprises me actually is financial services, but education, higher ed, and healthcare have definitely, from our experience and in our research, have lagged other industries. Another important thing to take a look at is what organizations do with the insights that they derive after they've actually found them, and how sharing or how willing are they to share those insights. And so there are different, so going left to right, you can see the least favorable outcome is insights are under-leveraged. After that, it's sort of uncoordinated. And then you get to informal action on insights. And then the last one is more of a workflow approach or closed loop or systemic approach to sharing those insights. And the last two bars on the right are actually pretty positive. So sharing is actually reasonably positive within most organizations. And of course, we don't have a chart on this right here, but those organizations that are the most successful with things like business intelligence and fact-based decision-making are really good at being transparent and sharing that information across the organization. And, those obviously that do it better, the organization, it tends to be more successful as well. And on the last slide I want to share you in terms of just the state of business intelligence has to do with penetration. This is where I introduce a term that I started using in 1993, this notion of information democracy. And this is also, I think, underscores some of what Daniel was saying, the fact that everyone in the organization and beyond the organization, all the stakeholders should have access to timely and relevant and actionable insights, those fact-based insights for decision-making purposes, that they can carry out the specific tasks associated with their role in the organization. And what's notable here is, and you're looking at a gap, so 2015 to 2019, you can see that we've actually made progress. So the bars on the left shows the penetration of under 10%. Now, there are still a lot of organizations that are in that situation. So 30% of organizations still have very limited access to those solutions. But you can see that it's been shifting to the right, and more organizations. So right now, 15% of organizations in our research community are saying that they're at 81% or more penetration. So delivering those insights broadly within the organization and even beyond the organization in many instances. So this is really powerful. This is very positive and also very hopeful. Now, we would like to see it moving a lot more quickly, certainly, but it's good to see positive progress. So changing gears again, let's take a look just very quickly at the objectives for business intelligence. What do organizations hope to achieve with business intelligence within their organization? Now, at the top, this is an easy one, better decision making. It's really hard to quantify that, certainly. That's highly subjective. But when you look at the others, those are quantifiable. So things like growth in revenues or operational efficiency, we can actually measure those things. Now, if we take a look at how things have actually changed year over year from 2018 to 2019, it's also encouraging because it's much more externally focused, much more strategically focused. And this changes, by the way, depending on what's going on with the economy. So if you're in the midst of a recession, you'll find that organizations are a little bit more focused on operational efficiency. And when we're in a growth mode, you see that organizations tend to be more focused on things like revenue and customer acquisition. And so this is much more right now, the period that we're in, is more externally focused and what I would consider more strategically focused than in previous periods. Now, this next section is really interesting, and this does speak to this whole notion of information democracy as well as self-service. How do we get more fact-based decision-making into the hands of more people within the organization? So if we take a look at, who is actually driving business intelligence within the organization? In other words, where's the impetus coming from? Who really wants this within the organization? And these might be the economic buyers as well, or they may be strong influencers. And what you find is that it's actually the drivers, the functional drivers have been shifting within most organizations away from IT. IT still plays a significant role in many organizations. The larger the organization, the more of a role that they will play. But you can see that operations, finance, sales, marketing all have a role to play. Now, if we take a look at how has that shifted over the last couple of years, we can actually see that, look, human resources jumped 12%, R&D jumped 11%, manufacturing 10%, finance 7%. So you can see that it's becoming much more broad-based in terms of who's actually driving the business intelligence initiatives within their respective organizations. This next one is sort of fun because this takes a look at the functions that are driving it by industry. And you can see, for instance, and I didn't circle any of these, I suppose I could have, but not a surprise if you look at the advertising industry, which is sort of that pink shaded area, marketing is clearly driving in that instance. When you look at retail and wholesale, sales is driving that. Finance also plays a strong role there too. When you look at education, R&D is a strong driver. When you look at things like healthcare, human resources is a strong driver. And then when you look at manufacturing, of course, they would say the manufacturing function is a strong driver. But what's notable here is there are clear differences, and many of these are not a surprise. We would expect that there would be different functional drivers depending on the particular industry that they're in. If we look at it by organization size, you can see that if you go from small organization to large organization, there is a clear shift in terms of who's really driving the business intelligence initiatives. The larger organizations, you'll see that IT is a much more significant player than in the smaller organizations. So you go from being very business-driven in the small and mid-sized enterprises, and as you shift to the larger enterprises, IT has a much more significant role than in those smaller organizations. So I think it's fun to take a look at it from that perspective. Next, we want to take a look at who are the actual targets. So we were looking at who's driving it, where the impetus is coming from. But now we want to take a look at who are the actual targeted users. And you can see that there's been a real shift, and this is also very hopeful and very encouraging. Now, I don't know how many of you have been in the industry as long as me, but when I first got into this industry, there was something called Executive Information Systems, something called EIS, and it was a big deal back then. Executives had these really fancy interfaces, required a tremendous amount of support. We certainly didn't have the kind of infrastructure that we have today, but back then, with all that support, these executives would have their own sort of dashboard interface, but no one else had it. So it was not an information democracy at all. And so over the years, and certainly over the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen it shifting downward and outward in the organization. So you can see it's been shifting away from executives and middle managers in favor of individual contributors, line managers, and even customers and suppliers. And I find that super encouraging. We want to see as many people having access, as many eyes on the data as we possibly can achieve. Now, when we look at by organization size, you can see some changes here too in terms of the actual targets. Executives, of course, very heavy across the board, more so in smaller organizations because in the smallest of organizations, they make up a significant percentage of the workforce. But you also notice that customers are much more of a focus in the smallest of organizations, and that also tends to trail off, as are partners and affiliates. So very small customers and partners, much stronger. As you go to the right to larger organizations, it tends to trail off a little bit. So definitely some differences based on the size of organization. Okay, let's change gears again and talk about collaboration and governance. And the reason this is important is that collaboration and governance, we actually cover that in our self-service report, and we believe those are cornerstones of self-service business intelligence. And to put things into perspective, to give you some context, and I hope you can see this, it's a bit of an eye chart, we ask about a whole bunch of different technologies when we survey our community every year. And we add to that list every single year. And so it gets bigger and bigger. And so the graphic gets a little bit more complex every single year. So I have a couple of arrows there where you can see governance and collaboration or collaborative BI in the context of a whole host of different technologies. So you can see they're in the upper half of technologies, and that represents self-service. And so just to give you some perspective on why we think they're really important, and oh, by the way, they are growing today. So once again, to give you a sense of what's going on out there in the real world, and it is changing, by the way, we always ask about how organizations are collaborating today. And it turns out that face-to-face meetings and email, those go back and forth, by the way. Sometimes email is a little stronger, sometimes face-to-face meetings. But the top three are face-to-face meetings, email, and then a formal presentation in a conference room of some sort. But number 4 is collaboration within the business intelligence or analytical tool. And that has been climbing historically. It's in 4th place. And that's really encouraging. Why is that really valuable? Because when you collaborate within your business intelligence environment, it keeps it in context. When you're using email, and we all use email every day, we are responsible for the context switching. And it goes all over the place, right? You get all kinds of emails. But when you're in the business intelligence tool, you can remain very focused, and it's a much more productive sort of environment. So that's encouraging. If we look at, and you can see we've been covering collaborative capabilities within BI for 8 years. This year will be our 9th year of doing that. And look at the inflection point around 2016. So it was always kind of important. It was above average. If you look at the weighted mean on the right, so it was always above or right around the 3.0, and then it jumped. And that rate, or where it is right now around the 4.0, is really high when you look across all the topics that we cover. So the collaborative capabilities within the business intelligence tool have grown and continue to be quite important to organizations. And so that's also really encouraging because we feel that that's, for self-service, that's a very important component. We take a look at the various features. Once again, it's relatively small print here, so I hope you can all see it. When we look at the various collaborative features, what most folks want to be able to do is to be able to annotate various objects, whether that's a report or a dashboard or a particular element. It could be anything, really, and then to be able to share that with others, but also be able to search for things. And so the value there is that we can leverage resources so we're not duplicating efforts within the organization, which inevitably does happen in many organizations. The larger the organization, the more that becomes a challenge to be able to find things and to find people who know something about the particular topic that you're currently engaged with. So next we talk about governance. And governance, you have to have both, by the way. Right? So being able to create content and share content and annotate content and collaborate, very important to be able to do that. But governance is really important because that drives consistency within the organization. That allows control as to who can have access to things. We can certify certain things as the official, whether it's a data set or metadata or particular reports or whatever the objects might be. It's really important. And you can see that the importance of this started off when we started tracking it back in 2016, started off really high and has continued to grow in importance since that time. So it's really very urgent to organizations. When we take a look at this by function, what's notable here is that operational roles certainly have place a higher priority on governance, but it's pretty important across the board. So even when you get down to marketing and sales, maybe begrudgingly they say it's at least very important to critical. So the entire enterprise sees the value of content governance within the organization. When we take a look at the actual requirements, what are we actually talking about as it relates to governance? Well, being able to, no surprise, define who has access to things, and then administrative oversight. And number 3 is really important, especially once again in a larger organization, to be able to have certified versions of things, to know that that is a sanctioned version, whether it's a particular model or a data set or a report, whatever the case may be, knowing that that's my starting point, that I'm working with the same thing that everyone else is working with. And then I may be able to modify it from there for my own purposes, but I think that's extremely important that we have that ability within organizations to shared certified editions. In some organizations, they also want to integrate with an external or an enterprise collaborative framework, and we'll talk about things like SharePoint, for instance, or some of the Google capabilities, or even file sharing capabilities, such as Dropbox. This is not a majority of organizations, certainly, and the larger the organization is, the more they do have that requirement to be able to interact with those things and be able to work with them more seamlessly with the collaborative BI capabilities. Now, in the next chart, when we take a look at which kinds of or which varieties of enterprise frameworks are out there in the wild, you can see that Microsoft SharePoint is number 1, but notice it does really well with the largest of organizations. When you go across to the right, you can see small organizations are using things like Dropbox or Google Suite, and so it does tend to balance out over time. And some of these environments are relatively specialized in nature. And as I said, for the most part, it's the largest of organizations that do care about this more so than the smallest of organizations. Okay, so I shared a lot with you, and I went pretty quickly. Let me just do a quick slide on conclusions here. I'm really bullish about what's going on in the marketplace as it relates to business intelligence and analytics and information management, and moving towards this notion of an information democracy. Once again, an information democracy is very much about delivering timely and relevant insights to everyone in the organization and even beyond the organization. And that doesn't mean that everyone has access to everything. That's really what governance is all about. But it does mean that we all need to have access to the things that we need to have access to in order to carry out our job and also to align with the strategy of the organization. So information democracy, really critical. We're making steps towards it. We could be doing a whole lot better for sure, but we have been making positive progress year after year after year. The next thing is also exciting, and we've been tracking this for many years, the fact that business intelligence and analytics has become much more broad-based, and that's part of information democracy, of course, but it's moved downward in the organization and even outward, and the business has taken an active role. It's not as IT-driven. IT is certainly an important component in many organizations and can support those initiatives, but the users, whether it's sales or marketing or finance or the executives themselves, they have become active and engaged in this process. And that's really important and very encouraging to my way of thinking. And then finally, this notion of collaboration and governance, that's really at the heart of self-service, which we think is really important. And that's the way that you create and support and nurture an information democracy. So I appreciate your time and attention. There's one more thing I want to share with you, and that's if this subject matter is of interest to you, we do have a conference every year on the campus of MIT. It's called Real Business Intelligence. There's a story behind that. I won't get into it today, but if you would like to attend our event, I suggest you check out our speakers and our agenda. It's a very different kind of event. So if you go to seebeyondthenoise.com, you can take a look at the speakers and the agenda. It's May 5th and 6th on the campus of MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we do have a special promotional code for you folks today, which will give you 50% off of the current winter pricing, which is a really great deal. So Looker219 is the promotional code you need to use. So on that note, I'm going to turn things back over to Daniel for the rest of the program. Daniel?
Thank you, Howard. That was quite interesting. You did not disappoint. So this brings the formal presentation to a close. So now we're going to open it up to questions. If you have not already submitted your question, this is just a reminder that you can do so by typing it into the Q&A panel on your screen. And we already have some, so I will put the first one to you, Howard. What are some of the trends behind natural language BI that you've seen?
Well, natural language BI is really interesting. I've been following natural language BI for many, many years. It's not new. There are a lot of things that are out there, by the way, that people are talking about that are not new. Things like machine learning, not new. The difference is we have much more capacity and ability to process large volumes of data more quickly, and so it becomes more feasible now. As it deals with natural language, that's also the case. So natural language has been around for decades. It's just we didn't have the processing power. And so I think that there are use cases out there for natural language query and natural language generation, and I don't know that it is something that is for all use cases. You know, once again, one of the things I always say is I start with the use case. What's the use case? And then we can talk about the appropriate paradigm for dealing with that particular use case. So there are use cases out there, but you have to be careful not to generalize and say, okay, well, natural language query or natural language generation is suitable for all use cases and all users. Once again, you have to understand the problem before you can attempt to solve it. But I do see a lot more of it out there. I see it as more of a feature for more of a broad-based solution. And I do think it's more promising, once again, because of our ability to process data more capably than we could have even 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's a great point about understanding the use case. I mean, the example I always use is like, when you're searching for flights on Kayak or Google Flights, you don't want to have to type in natural language. You want facets and the ability to do filtering and say, no, I don't want red eyes and all that, right? You don't want to have to say, I need the second cheapest flight that has the best, right? Like that would not be the way to do that search. So
that's right.
Understanding that use case, I mean, and particularly I think that, when you talk about it as a feature, it makes a lot more sense to me, at least, for people who are less frequent users of BI tools, simply because the people who are professional analysts and are using BI tools all day, all week, are really, really good at using the BI tool. They're really fast. They understand how to sort of, be that power user that can very quickly get what they need. And so, the idea of building a dashboard with natural language, probably not great for an analyst, but for somebody who's fresh to this tool, doesn't, have deep experience, might be just the right solution. So we have another question, one specifically about Looker, which I can take, and Howard, if you want to jump in, you're welcome to. So the question is, where does Looker find itself on the overall roadmap to a multi-cloud approach? Given that there's AWS and Azure and Google and then other clouds like ServiceNow and Salesforce and Workday and Okta and all of these, where does Looker fit into that world? So I would just say, as folks may have heard, Looker has become part of Google Cloud officially now, and we're very excited about that. But our vision and very much the vision of Google Clouds is one where people are using multiple clouds, where that's the norm. I think that is where the world is going, and we very much intend to stay with that philosophy. It's been true for Looker since really the very beginning, this idea that where exactly your data lives is less important than bringing it together in one place where you can sort of ask questions of all that data without having to centralize it on one cloud. So Looker is very much built for a world of, I have some data in an Azure SQL Server database, and then I have some data in Redshift, and I've just added some data in BigQuery. Like, that is the norm with Looker customers, and Looker doesn't really care where the data lives. And now we're also moving to a world where you can deploy Looker in AWS, in Google Cloud, in Azure. So we're very much built for a multi-cloud world. We're sort of cloud agnostic, and that is how we will stay. Howard, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great time to be the consumer of technology because there are fewer and fewer quote-unquote lock-ins, as we call them. And I think that all the vendors now have a healthy respect for the sort of the power, if you will, that the customers or the consumers of technology wield. And so I think that multi-cloud is a natural byproduct of that, being able to put your data in whatever cloud you want, to be able to separate the compute from the storage. That's really valuable too. So I think it's a great era for the end users, and I think that the largest vendors recognize that and respect that.
Great. So another question, Howard, I'll let you take first crack at this. What future do you see for open source in the BI world?
Well, it's interesting. Open source has been around for a really long time, and I think that where open source probably has the best fit is with other software organizations who embrace certain components of it. There are some organizations that adopt the entire open source stack. It does require a great deal of expertise, and supporting the community model, if you're up to speed and you know how to do that, that's a great environment for you. But open source is not free. People think, it's a cheap alternative. It's not, because you have to participate in that community and contribute to that community. So you have to have the expertise to do that. So I think most organizations will buy software, and inevitably that software will support open source componentry or will include open source componentry, and you may not even be fully aware of that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I definitely see the misconception that you were getting at there pretty frequently when I'm talking to people who are evaluating BI tools, where they say, well, it's free, so that's great. And as you said, the expectation of contributing back to the community is definitely not free. And frankly, the ability or the sort of cost in engineering hours to stand up and support these tools, which you don't have a vendor to wring their neck if things aren't working because it's open source. So you're taking on that full responsibility to keep the tool working and serving your users' needs. That most definitely is not free. So don't be. Yeah, go ahead.
Another point is that these are tools developed by technologists for technologists. This is not for your typical analyst, and so they are highly technical in nature, and that's why I think that when the functionality is really useful, and a lot of it is really useful, it's more well suited once again for a software organization to include it as part of something that's more approachable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a happy and longtime user of R, for example, I think R is great. I also think that the learning curve for getting going with R is can be pretty steep. And I think the community that they've built around ours is absolutely extraordinary, but I also can't really imagine trying to teach, a sales manager to use R. I think that, no offense to sales managers who may be on the line, but I think the expectation for what an enterprise software tool should be and how usable it should be for all kinds of users really runs against a lot of what's available in the open source world pretty frequently. So next up, another specific one about Looker. So just specifically about whether Looker can complete AND statements. So returning rows that match 2 or more conditions. That is something that I will just say yes to, because that is the answer, but also something that I think would be better served by a demonstration, which brings me or allows me to point out that there are links for more information on the screen for resources, our blog, as well as where to request a personal demo. So yes, the answer is absolutely, Looker can do that. But I think one of our solutions engineers would be well suited in a demo to show you exactly how all that works. So I have one more question, unless any others come in. So just, I'm curious, Howard, what are the commonalities that you see when initiatives fail, when BI initiatives fail?
That's a really good question. And it turns out I had that one chart which talked about the contributors to success, and it turns out that you could invert it, and those are the contributors to failure. You have and once again, largely the reasons that organizations fail has less to do with the technology. It has more to do with available skills. It has to do with the culture of the organization. It has to do with management, not just management support. I think that when the senior leadership team really values and understands fact-based decision-making, when they view it as core to their own personal success, then that tends to filter down in the organization. And I think that that's one of the core reasons that organizations fail with business intelligence. They don't have that support from the most senior levels of management or within the culture. And then beyond that, it definitely comes down to things like skills and having available resources. And, some people might, blame the technology. That's only because the technology can't defend itself. It's not usually the technology. I mean, great technology helps. It's a great enabler. You have to have all those other components in place first before you can be really successful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think if you have any doubt about the wisdom of what Howard's saying, you can just see the tremendous growth and maturation that's happened on the technology side over the last 20 years. And yet the numbers of sort of successful BI initiatives is certainly going up. It's trending in the right direction, but it has not nearly followed the curve that you might expect if it was all technology driven. I just can't agree more that change comes because people and technology come together to change a culture, and that is fundamentally how this works. And as Howard said, the sort of having the support of senior leadership, of executives, is great, but having their really deep buy-in, where it's not just, oh yeah, that seems like a useful initiative, go ahead and I support you and here's the budget, go do it, versus, oh yeah, I think we should transition to this new system, and in 3 months I want all of my reports that I use in my quarterly board meetings to come through that system. That kind of buy-in just makes a huge difference, because it creates urgency, it creates momentum, it creates clarity about objectives that otherwise just doesn't materialize, and that often leads to failure. So I completely agree. So let me just give one more check. It doesn't look like any new questions have come in. So I think with that, we can wrap up. Thank you again, Howard, for all of your insight. And I'll just reiterate that we've recorded this, and we'll send it along with some of the materials that Howard shared to you all who joined us today. Thank you again for joining us for this webinar. And if you have any further questions about Looker or want to get more resources, the slide that is up right now tells you exactly how to do it. Thanks very much. Thanks, Howard, and have a great day, everybody.